Welcome to Hallowed Ground Storycast. I'm Alan.
And I'm Anya.
And I'm Jan, and this episode is about my lifetime affection for the book The Paper Bag Princess.
Come back when you're dressed like a real princess.
This week, we are welcoming Jan Moffett to our show, who is the co-host of Clockworks, a Legion podcast, and the podcast Way Too Seriously. Welcome to the show, Jan.
Thanks. I'm excited to podcast with you guys.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you.
Absolutely. I love Way Too Seriously so much. Before we were even starting, I was telling you how much I love your show.
Nice. Always happy to have fans. I'm impressed that literally anyone listens to us at all, because we just started it basically for fun, sitting around our computer, doing what we do just in our regular lives, which is deconstruct things. And then, people started listening to it. It was great.
I mean, it's such an important niche, though, because I feel like, clearly your show demonstrates that there's a lot of there when it comes to children's movies, but no one else that I'm aware of is analyzing them the way you guys do.
Yeah, well, I wonder how long it can continue. Our kids keep getting older. I don't know if, we're going to have to start watching kids' movies without them to keep the podcast going, or if the podcast is going to have to, grow up with our kids.
Turn into, a teen movie podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. So this week, as Jan said, we're talking about a children's book called The Paper Bag Princess. And instead of doing a plot summary, we're just going to stage a reading because it's really short. If anyone feels like there are copyright issues, we're not showing the pictures. And I feel like pictures are an integral part of the kids' book experience, so it doesn't count. Not the whole thing. Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. Unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all her clothes with his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. Elizabeth decided to chase the dragon and get Ronald back. She looked everywhere for something to wear, but the only thing she could find that was not burnt was a paper bag. So she put on the paper bag and followed the dragon. He was easy to follow because he left a trail of burnt forests and horse bones. Finally, Elizabeth came to a cave with a large door that had a huge knocker on it. She took hold of the knocker and banged on the door. The dragon stuck his nose out of the door and said,
"Well, a princess. I love to eat princesses, but I have already eaten a whole castle today. I am a very busy dragon. Come back tomorrow."
He slammed the door so fast that Elizabeth almost got her nose caught. Elizabeth grabbed the knocker and banged on the door again. The dragon stuck his nose out of the door and said,
"Go away. I love to eat princesses, but I've already eaten a whole castle today. I am a very busy dragon. Come back tomorrow."
Wait!
shouted Elizabeth.
Is it true that you are the smartest and fiercest dragon in the whole world?
"Yes,"
said the dragon.
Is it true?
Said Elizabeth.
That you can burn up 10 forests with your fiery breath?
"Oh, yes,"
said the dragon, and he took a huge deep breath and breathed out so much fire that he burnt up 50 forests.
Fantastic!
Said Elizabeth, and the dragon took another huge breath and breathed out so much fire that he burnt up 100 forests.
Magnificent!
Said Elizabeth, and the dragon took another huge breath, but this time, nothing came out. The dragon didn't even have enough fire left to cook a meatball. Elizabeth said,
"Dragon, is it true you can fly around the world in just 10 seconds?
Why, yes,"
said the dragon, and jumped up and flew all the way around the world in just 10 seconds. He was very tired when he got back, but Elizabeth shouted,
"Fantastic! Do it again!"
So the dragon jumped up and flew around the whole world in just 20 seconds. When he got back, he was too tired to talk, and he lay down and went straight to sleep. Elizabeth whispered very softly,
"Hey, dragon!"
The dragon didn't move at all. She lifted up the dragon's ear and put her head right inside. She shouted as loud as she could,
"Hey, dragon!"
The dragon was so tired he didn't even move. Elizabeth walked right over the dragon and opened the door to the cave. There was Prince Ronald. He looked at her and said,
"Elizabeth, you are a mess. You smell like ashes, your hair is all tangled, and you are wearing a dirty old paper bag. Come back when you are dressed like a real princess."
"Ronald,"
said Elizabeth,
"your clothes are really pretty and your hair is very neat. You look like a real prince, but you are a bum."
They didn't get married after all. So thus was the paper bag princess. I guess thus is the paper bag princess. Jan, you have some production history and context to kind of share with us?
Yeah, I do. I mean, we haven't mentioned yet the author and illustrator of this book. So,
good point.
The Paper Bag Princess is written by Robert Munsch and illustrated by Michael Martchenko. Robert Munsch in Canada is a really well-known name. You know, in the States, he's known, but he's not. Like, in Canada, he is super famous. Paper Bag Princess is only his third book, but he's gone on to continue publishing until, like, he's still publishing now. So he's 68 books. And Michael Martchenko has illustrated 23 of those, so he's kind of known as the Robert Munsch illustrator. Robert Munsch is so popular in Canada that last year, for Canada's 150th birthday, the CBC put out a list of the top 150 best-selling books of the past 10 years. And so out of 150, 39 of them were Robert Munsch books.
Oh, wow.
So that's,
wait, really?
Yeah.
Well, that also means that like a significant number of the best-selling books were children's books,
yes.
Which is surprising to me, just like in general.
Yeah. And like that's in terms of just sales. So like,
yeah.
So you think about like all the parents buying books for their kids and the, you know, gifts that were given of these. But yeah, 39 out of 150. So that's like what? I'm not good at math. Anya, what is it? That's like 23%?
Slightly less than a third. Yeah.
So the number one book on that list was a different Robert Munsch book called Love You Forever. And number 3 was The Paper Bag Princess. So this is a hugely popular book in Canada. And
26%. Sorry, I just did that.
So I have in my hands a library copy because I own several copies of The Paper Bag Princess, but I do not own this 25th anniversary edition that has all this like extra information on the book. And so I took this out of the library for this podcast.
Oh, awesome.
So it has extra pictures that were drawn for it that weren't included. It has the story of the real Elizabeth. So Robert Munsch worked at a daycare or a preschool, I think, when he was and he told them stories, and he would use the names of the kids from the preschool.
Oh.
And Elizabeth was the name of one of the little girls there who acted kind of princess-like.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because it's dedicated to her. It says on the front, it says to Elizabeth and has a cute little illustration.
Yeah. So all of his books have the names of real kids in them because he goes around the country and kind of collects stories and collects names. And so then that's also partly what makes his book so popular is that they have it's like, you know, all the friends and family of that kid are going to buy that book.
I see. Man, I feel like that's a really cool thing to have a like very professionally well done children's book that's like about you.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that's an old move. You know, like Alice in Wonderland, there really wasn't Alice. And then, you know, like Peter Pan.
That's true.
Yeah, and the kids in Peter Pan were like real kids that the author knew. I guess there's got to be something to that, right? Like if you're going to write about children when you're an adult, you really need to like go to the source. You can kind of remember what it was like to be a kid, but to be around children is like really something special to help inspire you.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of kind of deleted scenes from the book that didn't make it in, basically because it's a children's book and they didn't want to publish it. So she originally was going to punch Ronald at the end.
Oh, man.
That would have been good, I think.
If it ever gets adapted for the big screen, I feel like they're going to have to add on a little bit more like fight scene.
There is a play of it. I've never seen it.
Really?
But there's a play as well. The other thing is, I sent you guys a picture of it, and maybe, I don't know if we can include this in like show notes or whatever.
Oh yeah,
but
definitely.
The original last was, there's this pencil sketch drawing of her just throwing the paper bag away, and she's walking naked into the sunset. And I love it so much. I wish that was the real ending.
Yeah. So the real ending is a very similar picture, but it's just she's still wearing the paper bag instead of being fully liberated. I mean, regardless, it's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I do agree that like thematically it would have been better served if she had shed her paper bag.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good picture too, because you can see, like, to the artist's credit, I'm not going to try and say his name, but
Michael Martchenko.
Because you can see, like, in her body stance, and yeah, it'll be in the show notes so you can see, there's like a very like casual "I'm done with you" set to her shoulders, and the way that she's throwing the bag, like, there's like a lot of attitude, even though you can't see her face. It's just all in her body posture, her shoulders. Yeah, it's great. But you can't see butts. You can't see butts for kids.
There's tons of kids' books with butts.
I know. Like, I have two small daughters, and they think butts are hilarious. They think farts are hilarious. What was your favorite part?
When the dragon goes around in 20 seconds.
Did you like when she shouted at the dragon?
Yes.
Into his ear?
Yeah.
What do you think of Prince Ronald?
He's mean. He's bossy.
Was it good that she didn't get married?
Yes.
Why is it good?
Because he was mean. You want to get married to a good person and the best person you can imagine.
That's a good idea. That's the picture they were going to use the first time. Then the person who was in charge of making the book said, no, we can't show her butt.
He is a party pooper.
What did you think of the art in the book?
The art showed her butt.
But you noticed something about the dragon in the art.
Yeah. Later on, his wings were really big when he was flying, and then later when she knocked on the door and he came out for once and his wings were so small, and then when he blew out all of his fire, his wings were really, really small. I did like one part.
Mm-hmm.
That part looks like the whole entire background is fire. And another thing I noticed was, as you can see, his nails are not like an orangish. And then because of the fire he did, it's like an orangish reddish.
Oh, yeah. And so to, like, not include a picture of a girl's butt in a thing that was like, I don't know, like, it seems like the perfect picture. I don't know why you wouldn't pick that one, but whatever.
Yeah, maybe because, I mean, it came out in 1980, so maybe it was a different time back then, because certainly there's tons of picture books these days that have naked butts in them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great one by Michael Ian Black, who's a comedian, and it's just called Naked. And it's about a kid who, like, thinks it's hilarious to be naked, and it's a great little book.
So I mentioned this at the end of the last episode when we were sort of hyping up this episode, but this is one of my favorite kids' books from my childhood, and it's the one children's book that I actually still own that, like, original copy that I've had since I was 5 or whatever. And I loved this book growing up. It was my favorite, and it's the one book that's managed to survive all of the culls, sort of like going through and getting rid of the things that I've outgrown. And because on the show we try and like do our favorite examples in different media, I thought it would be fun to do a children's book. And so, yeah, I'm super glad that we got you on here to talk about it. And I guess I think you might be a little bit older than me. Jan, did you also read this growing up?
I did, yeah. It was published in 1980, and I was born in 81, so definitely was around when I was a kid.
And because you're Canadian, you were like obligated to read it, apparently.
Exactly. I don't remember it super well from my childhood. I more it was a weird thing where a friend of mine, when I was a teenager, gave me these like tiny little versions of Robert Munsch books. I think she gave me like 3 different ones, and that was The Paper Bag Princess was one of them. And like, you know how teenagers are, where like, I have a quirky thing that I do. And so I kept these kids' books in my purse. And when we were like hanging out, I'd be like, look, I can read you all a story. Just to be
fantastic.
Like a quirky teen.
I wish I knew you when you
that.
were 15. Well, I would have been 10, so we probably wouldn't have gotten
There you
along
go.
that well. But maybe if 15-year-old me could have met 15-year-old you, I feel like I would have been into that.
There we go. Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't until I was like a parent really reading it to my kids, and then also as a librarian, I've become a picture book expert in the past 10 years, and so it's really been important to me in that like it's a very, very well done picture book, because I read a lot of picture books in my life.
Would you say it's like in your like top 10, top 3, or
Oh no, it's number 1.
number
It's
1?
absolutely
Okay.
number 1.
Well, yeah, I guess if it wasn't your number 1, I would ask like, well, then what are all of your other tattoos?
Yeah, exactly. It's partly it stayed number 1 because of the tattoo, but yeah, it's number 1. The number 2 would be Mo Willems. He is a New Yorker and writes amazing children's books as well. He's the one called Knuffle Bunny.
Oh,
That's number 2
yeah.
on the list.
That's big in my house.
Yeah.
We love Knuffle Bunny.
Yeah.
I probably say it wrong, but yeah. Yeah. And when Anya and I were first conceiving of this show, this is one of the first things that she put in there. And then she was like, let me buy this for your daughters, because I had never heard of it. I was like, what is that? I'm so impressed with the illustrations in it and how, like you said earlier, Anya, I think they are essential to experiencing the story. Like, we did a cool little radio play of it, but I don't think you're getting the full effect unless you can see the pictures, because they are so important to understanding the attitude of the characters.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Michael Martchenko's style is so beautiful and arresting. And like when you think about how to convey something like burning up 100 forests or like going around the world in 10 seconds or whatever, you know, like obviously that can't be depicted completely realistically. And I think the choices that they made were really good.
Mm-hmm. I remember Paul and I having a conversation like several years ago about what we think of when we think of what a dragon looks like. And both of us the dragon in this book is kind of what a standard dragon looks like. You know, it has little wings, it's got scales, it's got a pointy tail. That's just kind of standard dragon. And
it has
all
like
of the
weird
dragons are imitations of
antenna
that.
too.
Yeah, it does.
Are those ears? What is
Oh, I didn't even think about
yeah.
And like, how could it possibly fly with those wings?
Yeah, you're right. But I didn't even think about it because like I grew up on Pern books, and the dragons in Pern have like the little giraffe horn things, like that are the same kind of like, so in my mind, like, of course a dragon would have those. Like, why, if those were missing, I'd be like, what are you doing? You've messed up. But yeah, you're right. Like, that's not necessarily a thing. And the dragon has like this great like kerchief thing. And like, it looks so weird. It always looks it's so sleepy or so tired or so proud, like just from the body stance, and like the art is so good. Yeah. And it evokes that dragon, but it also is like, it's singular to the story, even though it does like have that archetypal dragon look. It's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up with this book, I wonder in retrospect how much it really impacted me and sort of like insulated me from falling into the classic Disney princess narrative. Because I watched all of the classic Disney princess movies and I liked them, but I was never like really that into them aside from The Little Mermaid, but that was all about being a mermaid. It was Prince Eric had very little to do with my love of that movie, or sort of like how I projected myself onto it. Like growing up, I never felt like I was ever waiting for the prince to rescue me, or that was never like a narrative that I was really invested in. And like, I wonder how much this book has to do with that. And like, I think maybe a lot. I don't know. If I could go back and talk to 6-year-old me, like, honestly, I probably wouldn't give very satisfying answers, but
yeah, it's hard to know what exactly influences you at that young of an age, but I feel like even like reading it to my daughters, it's influenced them. And we've gone away with like, what is the, moral of this story is don't marry someone who isn't nice to you.
It's good advice.
That's literally what my kids think this book is about.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for them it's like it's not even necessarily about like the like independence or the cleverness.
Yeah.
Cuz maybe they even just take all of that as a given.
Yeah, exactly.
They haven't been sort of conditioned to not think of themselves as like a capable main character in their own story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that. Don't marry someone who's not nice to you.
Your kids, from what you tweet about them or mention on your Way Too Seriously show, they seem very astute. And I mean, like, that's probably a consequence of being raised by a librarian and a professor of English.
Yeah.
I think you guys recently tweeted that you guys are reading to them The Hobbit, and they're like, are there really no women in this story? Can we change it, guys? This was like a request of your children of like, there's not enough women in this story.
Yeah. Our oldest daughter is 9, and she's definitely become more like self-aware of these kind of things recently. And obviously it's because she's growing up in a household with Paul and I who are upfront with all this stuff and like, hey, notice that there's no women characters in this thing we're reading. But yeah, with The Hobbit, she completely noticed it all on her own. We didn't even think of it, even though I had heard about other parents making Bilbo a woman or making other characters there's so many dwarves that you can just like, and Feely and Keely were female. Like, it doesn't matter.
I love that.
But yeah, it was her idea. That was really cool.
Oh, that's so interesting. That never would have even occurred to me.
Yeah, I've definitely read a few different stories online about parents changing like the Donkey Kong, I think, to make, instead of Mario, it's a princess doing like the Donkey Kong thing.
Oh, I've read that
code.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, so and then of course you'll hear the backlash on it and like, how
please.
dare they change such a thing, and like
Right.
It's just so like a kid can play it and feel like it's them.
That is what I do love about this book, is that, I mean, like, obviously a lot of thought went into it, but as you're reading it, it feels very unselfconscious. It's just like, well, of course Elizabeth is going to try and go get her boyfriend back, have to deal with this dragon using her wits to get herself through it. It feels very matter of fact. And while you're reading it, you're impressed with what she's doing, but you're not like questioning any of it.
Absolutely. And I think the idea of a princess saving a prince is not like the most, groundbreaking idea in the world. But what makes this book unique is that they have her reject him at the end. It's not that she rescues him and they go off and live happily. It's that she rescues him and discovers, oh, he wasn't really worth rescuing. I'm just going to go off by myself now.
And that she's not upset about that. Like, she's very joyful at the end. She's liberated.
I think so.
Yeah, she's like, great, I found out that you're not worth my time. Now I can just go do my own thing.
And it deconstructs a lot of other things about the way that young girls are acculturated. So, like, for example, the fact that she wears a paper bag, she's like covered in ashes. She's lost all of her fine things. So she's not, typically beautiful in that way. She doesn't have beautiful clothes. Her hair is a mess. She's dirty. And then she has no, like magical weapons or powers. She only has her wits. And so I think in a more standard, like Cinderella, for example, to contrast it with this, she is also like dirty and, like has no magic. But then the wonderful thing that happens to her is that all of that is inverted, right? That she becomes beautiful, that she has a wonderful dress, she has glass slippers, and she gets to go to the ball with the prince. Like, that's the wonderful thing that happens to her. And then in this story, and none of that happens because of her own capability. It happens because of like her virtue as a hardworking, meek woman who doesn't cause trouble. then the magic comes in and says, oh, you have behaved in a royal way. We will elevate you to a royal status. And in this, like, all of her royalness is stripped away. She wins by virtue of her mind, which is not another, typical thing that little girls are taught to value in themselves. I feel like in the culture, that's something. Boys are clever, girls are pretty, caring, and loving. They're not smart. They're not brave. They're not tricky. And I feel like this story like deconstructs all of that in a very intentional way. But like you said, Anya, it also does it in a really natural way where I don't feel like it's forced. It's not being preachy. It's like, it's fun and satisfying.
I also really like that we never get to see her get beautiful again.
Yes.
Afterward. The story ends with like her still being dirty and disheveled and, not having her fine clothes. And she's like perfectly happy and fine and complete without all of that.
Yeah, that's really true. And she's very, she's really shrewd is the word that I would use to describe her, because she not only is resourceful and like makes herself a dress out of a paper bag, she then is clever enough to defeat the dragon using her wits. Like, resourcefulness is not often a female trait in stories. You often have the Boy Scouts are the ones who are able to figure things out, and girls don't get to do that. So it's a good reversal of that.
So we've just talked a lot about how awesome we think this book is. But Jan, do your kids feel the same way about it? Is this like on their top 5 or number 1 picture book slot?
They do. They like it. They know that I like it a lot. And so it might be hard for them to admit if they don't like it.
That's fair.
I have a little recording of my oldest daughter talking about it that I'll send to you.
I don't know, I just like it because it's a princess rescuing a prince. And I like how it starts off. She's a beautiful princess. And she's in love with a handsome prince. And she just puts on a paper bag and goes to rescue the prince. And she ends up not rescuing him because she didn't want to. Most stories are all about princes rescuing princesses. So I like it that it's a princess rescuing a prince.
Yeah, that's true.
And I like the end where she just said, "You're not a prince. You are a bum."
Why do you think that I have a tattoo of this?
Because it's a great book.
Mm-hmm. They like the "Hey Dragon" part, because I always, when I read it to them, I really emphasize the "Hey Dragon" yelling. And so there's just the entertainment quality of the book. But definitely we've talked about it and talked about how, like, hey, isn't it cool that she saves the prince? And because they've seen like all the Disney princess movies and whatnot. So they do enjoy that, and they enjoy being strong girls and always questioning things. Like, we're very much teaching our kids to always, question authority, except for we don't want them to question our authority always.
It's tricky, right?
Kind of backfires sometimes. It's like always Paul always says, like, smash the patriarchy, except not me, because I'm your patriarch. Don't listen to me sometimes. Sometimes you just have to clean up your toys and brush your teeth and whatnot. But yeah, I don't know if it would be their favorite in the way that it's mine, but they definitely love this book.
Part of me even wonders if, like, growing up 30 years after we did, I mean, like, this book will always be good, but as it becomes, like, less necessary and critical as sort of like a counterpoint to the dominant cultural message, like, it makes sense that it would be less dear,
Yeah,
because it feels less important, right? It's like just a nice story as opposed to like something that you cling to as like part of an identity or a really intentional like philosophical stance.
Yeah, absolutely. Although, like, to be honest, we're raising our kids to be like feminist, and we try to do our best to be like gender neutral in a lot of in a lot of ways, but I work with kids and I see kids all the time in when I work at the library, and so many parents come in and they go, where are the books for girls? Where are the books for boys?
Yep.
But I don't want this thing because it's pink. I don't want this thing because it's blue. I don't want, it's not all that different these days, sadly. You feel like it's getting better, but it's not.
True. I guess it's like getting better in pockets.
Exactly.
And then in some places, yeah, I guess, so I don't have kids, so I don't really experience this all the time or on the same level as a lot of people. But apparently capitalism in some ways is like increasing gender specialization.
Absolutely.
Just because when we were growing up in the 80s, there were just toys, and then they realized that, oh, we can make more money if we sell the same thing in the pink and the blue version, because then the parents have to buy one for each, instead of having something that could be shared between boy-girl siblings.
Oh, it's like
absolutely.
It's worse than that. It's so much worse. You can probably speak to this too, Jan, but like what you're saying is true. There's the blue and the pink one. But then if you want to go buy the pink one, it's more expensive. And it's exactly
really?
the same thing. Yes, it totally is.
Absolutely.
It always is. And a lot of times it's of poorer quality too. Like if it comes to like clothes or something like that. Oh, it's a Star Wars shirt. One is pink and one is black. Like, what's the difference? The difference is the pink one is crappy material. Like that's the difference. And it was $5 more, It's
Oh
like,
my God.
yeah.
Absolutely. And when we've tried to, encourage our kids, like, hey, you can get whatever sneakers you want. You don't have to get these sparkly pink sneakers. You can get whatever ones you want. But then when my oldest went to school, she got made fun of for wearing boy shoes. And when you think about, that came from somewhere. That little boy didn't just suddenly know that those shoes are boy shoes. He was told by his parents or by his grandparents or whatever that those shoes are boy shoes. So it's really frustrating sometimes to parent with those attitudes around.
Yep. When my girls went to school for the first time, like my oldest was very into the Nickelodeon reboot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and she loved that show. And Michelangelo was like her favorite. She was so into it. And then she went to school. She had like her Ninja Turtle shirt on and came home like so ashamed and upset. Like she was mad at us because that is not a girls' show. Like all the girls were upset about it. All the boys were upset about it. And she said, why did you let me watch this show? And tried to explain to her like,
oh my God.
Yeah, like you can like whatever you want to like. And she's like, I just want them to like me. And so it's very hard, culturally to try and raise a kid gender neutral, and they have to have a lot of internal resilience, like is kind of exhibited in this story, but that's tough, it's hard for little kids.
I don't remember any of that. I don't know if I just like was a kid that had a lot of internal resilience, or if maybe I was raised in a community that was a bit more tolerant, or it's honestly, I was perhaps just oblivious to like how people were making fun of me, and then I had my friends who didn't care. I have a distinct memory of like in 5th grade suddenly like realizing that fashion existed. Because my parents are hippies, and so I had just never gone shopping for clothes before. Like all of the clothes that I had were, I think, mostly hand-me-downs or like things that my mom got at secondhand stores. But like clothes would just like show up and then I would wear them. and in 5th grade, I was like, wait, I want a pair of blue jeans, and I'd like never had a pair of jeans before. And we like went to the store and bought them, and it was sort of like, oh my God, this whole thing exists that like I've never thought about before.
That sounds exactly like how I'm raising my kids.
Right.
All the like secondhand clothes and stuff. Like, yeah, we just go out and buy them clothes. At some point, they're gonna care what they wear. But
Yeah.
at this point,
Like, honestly, the longer you can like live in a bubble and not know that, like, the better.
yeah, exactly.
Just, it's not worth worrying about. So, Jan, tell us about your tattoo. How did that happen?
They did it with a gun. And okay, sorry.
Yes, step by step. What
Okay,
happened?
It's a bit of a long, I don't know if it's a long story, but it's a story. I, at about 32 years old, kind of had a little freak out about that I wasn't the main character in my life, that I was kind of had been a supporting character for like all of my friends and my husband and whatnot. And I had a little mental freak out. And so I made this list of things to do before I would turn 40. And one of those things was to get a tattoo, because I'd been thinking about it for a long time and I'd always chickened out. And I was always like, grew up in a household that was very like, no, don't get a tattoo. Not for like really moral reasons, but for like, my mom works with the elderly, and she would always be like, any of those old people that have tattoos, they look so gross when they get old. Don't ever get one. Yada, yada, yada. So I definitely had it in my head that I shouldn't get one. And then, I started meeting more people, and like I went to the pool one day and I was like, literally everyone in this pool has a tattoo. And like, I'm like, it's really not as big of a deal as I've been thinking about it. So then I was like, well, what should I get? And I thought about this book, and I thought about, I had seen someplace like, hey, a paper bag princess tattoo that someone else had. And I was like, this book is really important to me. This idea is really important to me. This claiming of your own identity is really important to me, because that was kind of what led to me wanting to get the tattoo in the first place. And so I was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to get. And it's the image is just her leaping on the last page.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's just sort of like the silhouette.
It's the black silhouette on my ankle of her leaping into the air. So sometimes people will think it's like a frog or something because her legs are together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I can see that.
Bent. Yeah.
I had one person who recognized it on site, and I was really happy.
Oh, that's awesome. Honestly, I don't even know if I would have recognized that on site, because of all the times that I've read this book, I think I never paid that much attention to the very last image. And the bag is not super obvious in
that picture. Yeah. I think if I were to do it again, I might do a colored one. I might do it differently, but too late now.
That silhouette's also like the only time in the story where she's not wearing the crown is in that picture too. So
that's true. Yeah.
It would be a little bit. I could see, like on my version of the book, on the front it has a starburst thing that says classic Munch, and in the middle of it has that silhouette. And looking at it, I'm like, does that look like a frog? It totally looks like a frog. So yeah, I can see why somebody might say that.
There's that image is actually the logo for Anya Press, which is the company that publishes Robert Munsch books and lots of other books.
Oh.
So that's another reason why I chose specifically that image, was because Anya Press publishes children's books and picture books, and I am a huge fan of, and in my professional life work with picture books all the time. And Anya Press has a really awesome policy of highlighting First Nations and Métis and Inuit picture books. It does like multicultural Canadian books, and it's just a really good publishing company. So to have their logo on my ankle is also cool too.
Oh, I love that.
And so it's got a few different, like, it's kind of multifaceted, the meaning behind why I got it. It also kind of just represents my kids and like their joy, because it looks like it's just a joyful little girl leaping into the air, and that's exactly what my kids are.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Basically, that's the whole meaning behind it. I tend to explain that too much when people ask me. Some people are really cagey about their tattoos, like, oh, don't ask me about them or whatever. And some people are, and I'm the kind of person who's like, yeah, let me tell you all about it and the whole reason I got it and everything.
And actually, I have the book in my purse right now. Would you like
exactly.
me to read it to you? So, do you recommend? I mean, I guess as a librarian, your job is literally to recommend books to people. I guess, has anyone ever reacted negatively? Like, has anyone been like, how dare you, this liberal socialist propaganda?
I'm trying to think whether anyone has. I can't remember anyone reacting negatively in that way. I would say at the library, if I recommended it to a boy, the parent might be like, oh, I don't want a princess book for my boy. So that might be the only kind of negative reaction I would get. But mostly it's all positive, and I've given it as gifts to, parents friends when they have kids or whatever.
This is definitely my go-to baby shower present for people, and especially for girl babies, I guess. So I've probably bought 4 or 5 copies of the book to give away as presents at this point. You know, it is a weird thing. Like, I have never gotten the book as a gift for someone who's having a boy child. And I never really thought too hard about that until we were getting ready for this show. I was just thinking, you know, like, why don't I give this book as a gift to boy children? I mean, like, it should. There's no reason why they couldn't also enjoy the book as well.
Absolutely. I just was actually thinking the exact same thing, that I've only ever given this to girls and I should give it to boys too. There's no reason not to.
It's a good message for them to get as well, to like see girls as, you know, like main characters deserving their own story, and that independently from male characters. That's like the whole thing, right? Is that, you know, if you're a male, or specifically like a white male, and you grow up only ever reading stories where the protagonist looks like you, then it feels like an attack if suddenly people are making stories where now the protagonist doesn't look like you.
Absolutely.
Or only the antagonist does.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's the, you know, being able to build empathy with, you know, people who aren't you, with female people, it's like a learned thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if all little boys were given the gift of reading this book as young children, then like maybe they'd be more empathetic towards girls and more open to female characters later on as like teens and adults.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think I know what my nephew is getting for his birthday now that I've listened to all of that.
Nice.
I think you're right. He's still a little guy. He's not in school yet. So I think he would actually really like this because, you know, the pictures alone are pretty good. And it is a learned, I think you're right that it is a learned skill to, like, you know, see people who don't look like you and to learn that they also matter. Like, kids are notorious, like anybody who has kids, they're like little narcissists. They just, you know, like me.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, they're also pretty oblivious. Like, you know, I was saying earlier about, you know, my daughter didn't think about the fact that Ninja Turtles might not be for her until someone told her that it wasn't for her. So at the same time, like, if you read this to a young boy, like, if he hasn't been told, oh, princesses, you shouldn't learn about that. If he hasn't heard that message yet, then he could internalize this in a way that'd be like, yeah, of course, princesses are awesome and princes are awesome and everybody's awesome and you're awesome and I'm awesome. So that would be, you know, a really valuable thing to have as a small child.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot in here that should appeal to anybody of any gender. Like, the interaction between her and the dragon is really funny, and her cleverness for how to overcome that is really cool. And like, male kids should be able to enjoy that and even like see her as sort of like a aspirational role model, even if they're not the same gender.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that wraps us up for this month. Come join us next month for an episode on Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood with special guest Sarah, also known as other_girl on Twitter. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. That's the best way for us to find new listeners.
And in the last month, we did have a couple of people leave us some reviews, and we saw those and really appreciate them. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to get all of our poems done in time for the recording. But next month, we will include your haikus as we promised.
So, Jan, where can we find you on the wild world of the interwebs?
You can follow me on my personal Twitter at JLMO, JAYELLEMO. You can find my podcasts, Way Too Seriously and Clockworks, goodstuff.fm/WTS. You can support us on Patreon and find our podcast there on patreon.com/clockworkscast.
Awesome. And I'm Anya, and you can follow me on Twitter at StrangelyLiteral. That's strangely, then LITERL.
I'm Alan, and you can follow me on Twitter at ChipperAlan. You can follow the show on Twitter at HGStorycast and visit our website at hgstorycast.com. And if you want to get the links to everything that Jan mentioned, that will all be in the show notes. So you can go support her Patreon and subscribe to her excellent shows, because you should do all that.
Yeah, definitely go listen to Way Too Seriously. You don't have to watch the movies necessarily before listening to the episodes. I would say The Little Prince is the only movie that I've gone out of my way to watch before I listen to the episode, which you should also definitely do. The Little Prince episode is just amazing, and the movie is also amazing. And now I'm so distracted. I've gone off on a wild tangent. But yeah, you can totally listen along and appreciate everything without having watched the movie ahead of time. And yeah, if you'd like to leave us feedback, you can visit hgstorycast.com/contact or send an email to contact@hallowedgroundmedia.com.
Thanks so much.
Hallowed Ground Storycast is a Hallowed Ground Media production and is produced under a Creative Commons non-commercial share-alike license.